it's important that we don't just look at it through one lens, but look at it and say there are opportunities for companies who are making the shift to survive this. In fact, when you look at the profit pool for software, it's not shrinking, it's actually expanding. The challenge is that's just that AI type solutions are going to get a bigger piece of that profit pool if these other companies are not able to make the shift. They're going to decline in terms of what portion of the profit pool that they're getting.
Exactly. If you're a SaaS vendor and you're not rethinking your business model, essentially looking at your business through the lens of how would an AI native firm
Right.
attack this problem, you're missing it.
Welcome to the Insurgent Mindset. I'm Rondo Moses.
And I'm Matt Tice. And the Insurgent Mindset is a podcast to help leaders reframe their perspective to compete differently in an era of instability and disruption. So today, Rondo, we're going to talk about a really interesting topic. Over the last several months, there's been some debate about the future of software as a service, SaaS. And a few months ago, there was a term, if I can pronounce this correctly, the SaaSpocalypse, which was sort of introduced in the wake of a major sell-off of SaaS-related software stocks in February, March. And I suppose now, a few months later, reflecting on what happened then and where we're at, I think it'd be interesting to unpack this particular topic to get a real sense of what is the future of SaaS software? Is it being disrupted? And what can people on the sell and the buy side do about it?
Yeah. I think we should start probably of how this SaaS apocalypse came into focus because I think it was in February when Anthropic launched its Claude Code. And Claude Code was shown to, its agents were shown to be able to handle some sophisticated tasks such as, financial analysis, project management, and software development. And so that sent the shockwaves through Wall Street. You've had, hedge fund folks making $24 billion on shorts. And to your point, this analyst made this term, coined the term SaaSpocalypse because he saw this as maybe this is going to be a structural shift in the SaaS industry. So some will say whether this is structural or not, it's not the first time that SaaS shares have taken dips, right? So the question is whether this is really real, because back in 2008, you had a 52% decline. And then during the COVID, I think it was in 2020 or 2021, there was another 34% decline because treasuries went up because of the Fed rate changes. Those all recovered within, 2, 3 years. Now, the question is whether this is real or whether this is just another blip along, SaaS's trajectory.
Well, first, we have to admire the creativity of the apocalypse terminology, right? So,
Right.
absolutely brilliant. Um, I think the issue at hand, that's a one-off, and I completely agree with you. You're going to see sell-offs from here and there. I don't think that's the signal or that's the noise, not the signal, whatever. But ultimately, is the SaaS business model likely to be disrupted? Is that business model resilient to Claude and others that are coming into the market with an alternative perspective, essentially giving enterprises a build option and an option to do those builds very quickly? And I'll tell you where I got interested in this, Rondo. Over the last 5 or 6 months, the signals keep repeating, right? So the first signal I got was a chat with a senior executive at one of the major CRM providers. And this is probably in March, April, having just a chat with him about, look, is this thing going to even be here in 5 years? And confidentially, the individual shared his story with me and said, we're seeing a lot of pressure, both in terms of churn and share price, and we're really panicking about it. This is a big upper middle market CRM provider. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. So what you're seeing basically is now people are starting to switch. And he said, yeah, we're looking at many clients that are coming to us saying we can replicate this capability using AI. So that was really interesting. So I won't share who it was because obviously he shared it with me in confidence, but so that's
Sure.
one signal. So fast forward a little bit, I went to a site visit with a client to look at a company that we were thinking about purchasing. And we got through the usual sort of plant tour. We looked at his infrastructure and the whole thing. And at the end of the discussion, I asked him a simple question, which what's the operating system that you're using to run this business? And this guy lit up, and it was fascinating to see his excitement. And he said, "Well, it's interesting you asked. We just replaced our ERP with a home-built cloud system." Okay.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. How long did it take you to build?" He said, "I built the guts of it over a weekend and 2 or 3 more weeks of fiddling, and we got this thing into production." And then he showed it to me. And essentially, all the way at the very end of his, or at the very beginning of his process, where it's a building supplies company that's selling building supplies downstream to installers. And so they created an app at the front end where the app essentially helps the installer do measurements and things like that at a building site. Those measurements then get turned into a bill of materials, engineering drawings, invoices. It flows through their system all the way into finance, into marketing, all of it, right? And
Yeah.
then he walked me through and showed me how the system queues up these jobs into their machinery. So the AI automatically translates these photographs into drawings, which then go into CAD files, which then go into their machines, and then queues up queues up the production. It was unbelievable. So then he shows me the master control screen, and there you can see all these jobs queuing up, queuing up, queuing up, and it was really quite impressive. And so I asked him, security, reliability, etc. And he did say that, for the first few months they ran them in parallel, trialed it, blah, blah, blah. But eventually now it's in a secure cloud server. It's not really exposed, but I thought that was a strong signal. So one more. So I was giving a talk a few weeks ago, and a gentleman from a mid-market, upper mid-market firm was posed a question to the group that I was speaking with about his ERP and said, "I've got this ERP. It's got a lot of technical debt. Had it for 7, 8 years. I hate it. And I'm debating
Mm.
whether to replace it." So the debate was, do I replace it with another ERP? Do I replace it with something else entirely, or do I build? And again, I thought it was really interesting to hear his perspective on that. So these signals start to add up, and not only are you reading about it in the papers, but I'm seeing these decisions on the ground with clients now virtually every week.
Yeah, I met a CEO last month who's in the real estate development industry, and he says that his company is using agents in their accounting department and pretty much exclusively. And so they built their own system in their accounting department and found that it's been very successful. They're not using it to replace people, but to help them focus on more high value activity. But another CEO who was there at the same time also mentioned how he's actually using these agents similarly, and he's actually reducing his hire because of it. So they're becoming, I think, a big deal in organizations. And there was a study of CIOs that came out that said that at least 38% of the CIOs that were surveyed said that they are replacing at least one SaaS tool with AI agents, and that the expectation was another 78% said they'll do at least more in the coming year. So there's a momentum, I think, building around thinking about whether build or buy, and there are some that are looking at versus immediately deciding that they're going to go with a SaaS tool, really taking the time to step back and analyze, does it make sense to build it and bring it in-house? There's certainly advantages to doing that.
Now, that's not so the agent piece, I suppose, at some level is part of it, but you're also talking about creating custom software essentially to replace SaaS, right? So you can imagine going to, oh, and I came across another one where this individual who I was interviewing to come onto the podcast, and he built a business around disrupting Salesforce and basically looking at firms that are spending something like 300 to $500,000 a year on Salesforce and offering a meaningful alternative to that at a fraction of the cost. So, I think it's two things. Is one is at one level, as the AI gets better and the agents, to your point, get better, you can imagine a situation where you don't actually even need the software because the business question then translates into tokens, and then those tokens draw from the data and self-assemble the software to give leaders and managers and frontline workers and back office workers, wherever it is, the answer to their query. So you can imagine a world where you've got this really strong base data layer, but this thin layer of emergent sort of capability in AI will be uh, more likely to start to replace in the short term the peripheral SaaS apps. And I don't think you can find a single executive anywhere that doesn't have SaaS bloat, right?
Right.
Either in an existing, big application like a Salesforce or something like that, which is, obviously one of the most disruptive companies and business models in the history of business. But even that's starting to kind of unravel a little bit. But we all
Hmm.
have them. You've got dozens of SaaS subscriptions. You've got this, you've got that. You've got tons of capability that you never use. And ultimately, it all comes back to what am I trying to do? I'm trying to generate insights and solve problems. And you can imagine a world where that's much more emergent as you know, as your software self-assembles, or even in a world that we just described today, where you start to create your own applications, which has always been the case, right? So the build buy question has gone back for decades and decades. There was a period way back where firms definitely preferred to build, and that gave way to enterprise software and then to SaaS, and here we are now, probably with another shift again.
But I think companies, CEOs have always had a love-hate relationship with these big software implementations. They're so difficult. They're so painful for organizations. That's in essence been part of what's been the SaaS moat for so long. The fact that, it was like really expensive to build, the implementation is painful. It just requires a lot. And I think with these AI agents now, there's an opportunity to change the equation. So think about it this way. You can have 10 AI agents that can do the work of 100 salespeople, for example, in sales, but in Salesforce. And in the old model, you would need to buy an AI license for 100 salespeople. Now you only need 10. So there's a cost, an economic component to it. There's also a component around the capital requirement that's required to build it. You need less capital to build these now than you did in the past. And there's a quality element because you now can actually connect into that company's workflows, data. You get something that's a better fit for you as opposed to getting something that's off the shelf that's not necessarily aligned to your internal processes.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point also with that change management point, where you can imagine if you have a sales team of, say, 50 people, 25 people, the compliance to CRM has always been a problem. Just if I take CRM for an example, compliance is always a problem. Getting these guys to fill in the data, people hate it, takes up time off it consumes time on the road, takes forever to implement these things. Compliance, the change management, all that takes forever, not particularly dynamic. And no one loves their CRM. It's sort of
Right.
it's a I don't hate this one all that much is probably the best you can get. Even, we have one and it's the same thing. It's like, gosh, I really wish it could do this, but it can't. This other one can do that, but that one can't do this, whatever. So, but I think that's exactly right. So if you had this capability, and you can imagine, first of all, if the team is coming together to co-create, like here's what we need, then that change management becomes much you're not pushing a tool on them. What they're doing is they're designing for their own needs and they can see the prototypes in real time. That kind of creates that, built it for you with you is, I think a really interesting recipe for, kind of getting compliance and to get people kind of engaged. But also with the agents, to your point, if you take a sales team, again, virtually every sales team will lose, there'll be like 20 to 30% leakage on admin. So
Yeah,
giving the agents that admin to free up additional capacity for the salespeople to be on the road in front of clients. If you can imagine, now I've got 30% more capacity to sell. Uh, you're not getting rid of salespeople, right? Those people are selling more. So essentially,
right.
you're actually capturing more value. And I think that's kind of the mindset you have to be in, right? The kind of the mindset of how do I create more opportunity to create more value rather than potentially well, certainly we want to try to reduce our SaaS cost, but in doing that, the double win is how do I free up human capacity to do more important work that will generate more value? And I think that's the opportunity space.
Yeah. Yeah. I also just want to say too that, the whole idea of SaaS apocalypse was spread across the whole sector. But I think that there's two different ways of bifurcating the sector, right? So you have the general purpose tools, the tools that focus on general purpose activities, tasks, for example, back office tasks, sort of low value tasks in essence, versus tools that are more specialized, maybe tools that focus on regulatory compliance or industry specific activities. Those SaaS tools and products are less, I think, at a less disadvantage than the ones that are general purpose. So I think the whole SaaS apocalypse idea is real if you're in the general purpose space. And similarly, I think that there are companies, for example, like Salesforce. Salesforce has been adapting. So it's recognized that, these AI tools are coming at them with new business models and impacting their old business model, and they are starting to pivot. So you now have AI agents within Salesforce, and they're also billing differently. So they're not necessarily billing per seat; they're building a billing per outcome. So the focus is less on per seats in their model now in certain packages, and more on measuring execution. So I think that that's organizations that can make that shift and recognize that the same old focusing on features and et cetera is not going to be it. They've got to really adapt their business model to this change. They're going to be the ones that are going to be successful and they may survive this period.
I agree with that, Rondo. Just comes back to the business model. In many ways, this feels very similar to the cloud transition of the maybe 2005 to 2015 that we went through, where enterprise software had to go through a major shift from, the on-premise business model to the SaaS business model, and now we're
Mhm.
shifting again, maybe from the SaaS business model to a new model, to your point, focused on outcomes or whatever. But ultimately, the incumbent trap still exists. You have all this recurring revenue over here, and that recurring revenue has been valued by the market at 28 times EBITDA, right?
Yeah.
And this new model is making a shift that might be valued at 8 or 10 or 12 times EBITDA. That's a huge adjustment, right? Not only from a point of view of, am I capturing as a Salesforce or, an incumbent, am I capturing the share of the new value coming into the market? Maybe, maybe not. But I also have to make that adjustment. And the market, whilst it may be patient with me, uh, you have tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of these install-based contracts, SaaS recurring
Right.
revenue contracts that have to be transitioned. So flipping that over, it's really a race. It's a question of whether or not you can make that adjustment fast enough. And also in interior of these organizations is can you adjust your operating models quickly enough, your selling models quickly enough? Can you educate your clients to a different view? All these things require almost a complete bottom-up rethink. And it is a question mark, and it is always a question mark when and how you can manage those two business models in parallel. Do they need to be separate and distinct? Can you reprogram the existing model to a new reality? And that's an open question, I think, for the SaaS industry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just think that it's important that we don't just look at it through one lens, but look at it and say there are opportunities for companies who are making the shift to survive this. In fact, when you look at the profit pool for software, it's not shrinking; it's actually expanding. The challenge is that's just that AI type solutions are going to get a bigger piece of that profit pool if these other companies are not able to make the shift. They're going to decline in terms of what portion of the profit pool that they're getting.
Exactly. So if you're a SaaS vendor and you're not rethinking your business model, essentially looking at your business through the lens of how would an AI native firm
Right.
attack this problem, right? You're missing it, right? You could be working on the margin to put agentic capability into your software or embed AI into the workflows and things like that, and virtually everyone's doing that. But the bigger question, the x-axis question in our lingo is that business model going to survive? And what do you need to do to reprogram it? On the client side, though, right, you're looking at this, and I think there's a whole bunch of things you got to be thinking about. One
Yeah.
is your partner going to survive, right?
Mm.
You're going to make a 5 year, like this fellow that I met a couple weeks ago, he was framing as this is a 5 year decision. Can I make a 5 year decision in this sort of volatile environment? Because I don't know if these people are even going to be around. Maybe I wait
Yeah.
1 or 2 years, see how it evolves, and then make that decision then, or maybe I start experimenting now. I don't know, but ultimately that's a big deal. And then, if you're the challenger, and we always say this, where do you look for disruption opportunities? You look for lazy firms with unsatisfied customers, right? So, or if not unsatisfied customers, sort of some unmet demand. And in this case, if you can imagine, as we've discussed already, that you can assume that the challenger will come into the market and say, your SaaS spend is too high. You're too slow. Their release schedule is too slow. You're not dynamic and you're not able to adjust. And we can offer a meaningful alternative to that at a fraction of the cost. Are you interested? Every single executive on the planet's going to take that meeting. So
Yeah.
I think I think that's where we're heading.
I think about this and I say, every organization that has outsourced its core workflows have tended to look at these vendors to do that, and they called it sort of their technology strategy. So, what does it really mean then for these companies to treat software as a strategic capability rather than looking at it as just something that they put out for a catalog of subscriptions? Like, what is that? Does that really require a mindset change for that CEO and that CIO in that organization?
That's a great question. I have a kind of a slightly different perspective on this. I think unless you're a software company, software isn't a strategic capability. A capability is a capability, and a software is a means to bring that capability to life. So, from that point of view, uh, I'm less convinced that the software itself is, although it can be, right? Like maybe you have a bank and their core system, whatever, it was developed in 1970 in COBOL or Fortran or something. Maybe that's their strategic capability, but I really doubt it. And I think this is really important. We should talk about this more in another podcast, Rondo. I think the first part of your question is the right question. What are your strategic capabilities? And then the bigger question is, how do you expand on those capabilities? How do you leverage those capabilities, compete better, differently? And how do you do that quicker? And then my question is then, what role does software play in that? I think it's sort of a kind of 180-degree inversion of the question. Um,
Hmm.
but not always true. I mean, certainly some firms have deeply embedded IP that's inextricably linked to their software, which does create competitive advantage. So therefore, you can make an argument that that the software is the capability, and I don't disagree with that notion. But I think
Or it's an element of the capability,
an
right?
element of the capability,
Yeah,
exactly. So I
right.
think the question is, what are the capabilities that are going to fuel our future competitive advantage, and what role does software play in that? And then how do we leverage this new capability, these new technologies, agentic or emergent AI, et cetera, to bring those capabilities to life?
Right. And that could be maybe a lens that they would use, an organization could use to determine, what types of solutions that they want to build internally versus buy, right? If they really deem that it's a part of a strategic capability pack, then maybe they need to consider or should be looking at whether it's worth bringing that solution in-house.
Right. And I think that's a great rubric in essence, right? So in probably there's three things that would be on my mind, right? So one is where that build will help you create new capability quicker that will generate new sources of value. That's a good place to look. Where
Hmm.
that capability will help you reduce constraints or bottlenecks in your system that prevent you from competing more effectively or quicker. That's another great place to look, and
Hmm.
so on, right? So you start to develop a bit of a rubric, and everything else you're just going to outsource. But from I think from this point forward, we're in a deep trend, and I would expect that we're going to start to see the SaaS business model evolving very quickly, uh, if not across the board, to your point, certainly for horizontal firms that are offering general purpose solutions, that will start to change. And there'll be maybe the vertical ones will be a little bit more sticky, but I think the SaaS apocalypse, well, probably a bit, brilliant term again, probably a bit overblown, a bit hyped. I could imagine in 5 years that you know the emergent AI will really start to replace a lot of this enterprise software.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to hearing from our listeners to get more perspective, and we'd love to hear your stories and cases on this. It's a fast moving feast, so we'll see what happens. But anyway, for today, let's wrap up Rondo. Just encourage everybody to come find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Rondo.
Thanks, Matt.